Welcome, everyone, to this Professional Development Hour presentation brought to you proudly by the Atlanta Metro chapter of the Georgia Society of Professional Engineers, an affiliate of the National Society of Professional Engineers. This presentation is brought to you tonight live from Wild Wings Cafe in Dunwoody, Georgia. Before we begin, we'd like to let you know that any opinions presented tonight are solely the opinions of the presenter and not that of the Georgia Society of Professional Engineers, the National Society of Professional Engineers, or any other of its affiliates. We certainly hope you will enjoy tonight's presentation, so sit back and relax. And on with the show.
We have three members here today, Bill, Darien, and Taylor. I will let them introduce themselves just to speed things along a little bit for the purposes of the mechanics of how we're going to do this. If you have a question, we have a couple of mics for the audience, the live audience, or you can step up to the mic right here. And for the folks listening to us live on YouTube, you can submit your questions via chat, and we will read them out. And thank you very much for attending. And please help us make this a very interesting and interactive meeting. Thank you, Tuiko.
Okay. All right, I'll start. I'm Bill Womack. I am a semi-retired electrical engineer, and I was first appointed to the board in December of 2012 and was reappointed a few years ago, and my term will expire in 2025.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Darien Sykes. I am the structural representative of the board. I am president of Sykes Consulting. We're a structural engineering firm that's been in business for nearly 20 years. I just wanted to say thank you for having us over here. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to a good conversation.
And I'm Taylor Wright. I work for Atkins. I'm one of the three civil engineers on the board. I was appointed by Governor Deal in 2015, and I'm currently I'm finishing out the first year of my second appointment. Look forward to the conversation.
Tell you what, I'll start because I'm the oldest guy. Always do this. How many professional engineers do we have in the room today? Raise your hand. Okay. How many have read the laws and rules and policies of the board? Okay. That's actually more than I thought. Because I was going to remind you, we have a board rule 180-6-.01, parentheses 3, that says all persons registered under Georgia law 4315 are charged with having knowledge of the existence of these rules of professional conduct and shall be deemed to be familiar with their several provisions and understand them. So that's where we are. But the three of us are 1/3 of the board. The board is made up of 9 members, 8 which are engineers, or actually, 6 are engineers, 2 are land surveyors, and 1 is a public member that we have. And we were just going to start off this afternoon or this evening with some of the things that we have accomplished in the last year or so. And 2 of them are we have made modifications to Rule 80.02. This is sealing of documents. And what we changed in that was we are now going to require anybody who has a COA that is put on with your stamp, signature, and date. You also put your COA name, its number, and its expiration date. Because what we've found over the years is when people get in trouble and forget to renew their license, they also forget to renew their COA, which is required. And the other one that we worked on was 180-11-.07, and this is exemptions for continuing education. And we cleaned up the writing there, or the language, which also stated if you were over 65 years and you had been licensed for 25 consecutive years in the state of Georgia, you could then waive the CE requirements. So that's kind of what we've been working on, and I'm going to let Darien.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the recent structural engineering license. Um, Back in the late 2000s, there was a study done by NCEES, and that study showed that the current 8-hour exam for those that design designated structures, and I'll explain a little bit about designated structures, but uh, it indicated that the 8-hour exam was not sufficient enough to indicate whether or not someone was capable of designing a designated structure. This was a several year study performed by NCEES. So in 2011, Georgia adopted what was known as the model law for structural engineers, where those that would design designated structures were required to take an hour exam. And then that requirement created some challenges for those that didn't necessarily want to design designated structures. There was no way to really define, who to take exam uh, and how do we determine, how do we distinguish those who took the 16-hour exam from those who took the 8-hour exam. So we created a rule at that time that indicated what a designated structure is. That wasn't really enough to help things like if there was a structural engineer that wanted comedy in another state, or to handle the administration associated with a 16-hour examination or 8 examination of versus testing. So just recently, past year, we got it was 2 years ago because COVID just kind of blur, but 2 years ago, we passed a law that essentially creates an SE license. Now, those who do pass the 16-hour exam, they get a PE license and they get a license. But then what this also did was it allowed for those who did not want to take the 16-hour exam to be now there were several engineers that were granted the opportunity to take the 8-hour exam, or from comedy applicants. So we found that it actually not only provided clarity, but then also gave more opportunities as well. So it eliminated any competitive advantages that other states would have if there was SE that in another state that was coming in competing with a Georgia engineer. It gave SEs an opportunity to compete with them as well. So that's sort of the law in a nutshell. I'd be glad to answer questions later on.
Well, Bill and Darien talked about some of the rule changes and obviously law changes that have taken place in the last couple of years. I'm going to just mention a couple of rule changes that are in process that have not been officially approved but have been approved by the board. They both deal with sealing of documents, the 180-12 rule. The first rule change is related to probably a little known aspect of the law, at least in my industry. My background is transportation design. So the law requires that the licensee seal every sheet in a set of plans. I can tell you that has not always been the practice. A lot of engineers have stamped the cover sheet. And that just requires some clarification, but I use the example of a set of plans that we did that was 30,000 plan sheets. So sealing every sheet sometimes it makes it a logistical challenge. So what we did, we worked with the Georgia Department of Transportation. We looked at a model rule from Florida, and we've drafted a rule change that would allow a table to be placed at the front of a set of plans where for each aspect of the design. So in this table, they can seal sections for which they are going to be responsible, rather in lieu of having to seal every plan sheet. That may not be applicable to everybody, especially if you have, you know, a set of plans that's 5 sheets. But in my example, sheets, it definitely can come in handy. Again, the board has approved that rule. It is pending approval by the governor's office right now before it becomes an official rule. Oh, thank you. And Bill's pointing out that we, is that scheduled? There's a public hearing scheduled in October. So look out for notice of that from the Secretary of State's office. The other rule change, and well, we haven't proposed a rule change yet, but we're starting to look at digital sealing. It's something that's, with the latest technology, with 3D capability, is something that we're getting a lot of questions about. We're starting to look at our rule. Our rule is typical with a lot of states. Our rule, just for your information, requires digital sealing. There are actually 3 levels of sealing a document. There's wet signature, which all of us are probably used to doing. There's electronic sealing, which is, you know, you just place a seal in your signature in a document using some kind of a CAD or Adobe. And then there's digital sealing. And our rule requires digital sealing. There's 4 parts of the rule. Number 1, the digital seal has to be unique to the licensee. It has to be in their sole possession. It has to be verifiable. And probably the most important part, if there's changes to the document, then the seal is invalidated. So that's something we're starting to look at. One thing we know we got to clean up is the rule states it's an electronic signature when it's actually, if you understand the rule, it's actually requiring a digital signature. So look for changes to come on that.
All right, so now the question is, we're here to answer questions. So please fire off. Actually, before we do that, you were going to do this, but I will. I hope everybody understands that the members of the board are not paid employees of the state of Georgia. We do this out of the goodness of our hearts. I will say this, we are paid expenses to drive to the meeting and back. But I know from a fact we probably all work somewhere 8 to 12 to even 16 hours a month on board business. And you know, we're not paid for that. So, you know, understand that we are all volunteers, and we're happy to be the volunteers. So, any questions?
Well, since you opened that up, it might be, you know, it might be helpful to understand some of the responsibilities that we do have. Maybe one of the most important is reviewing applications. Typically, an application to take the test, the PE test, typically is first reviewed by staff. And if there's any questions about the application, it comes to one of us. Generally, it comes to the discipline for which they're applying. But it takes a good bit of time. That's probably our most time-consuming and maybe most important duty as a board member. We also review. You know, if you know the rules, you know that there's a random audit for continuing education, and we review those audits. When somebody is called for audits, they submit their package, and we review that and decide whether or not they've met those obligations. And maybe the most solemn duty that we have is investigating complaints. That's probably the least fun duty, but it's an important part of what we do. Did I miss anything?
Yes, sir.
Bill, I have a question. My question was going to be, why doesn't the board get paid? I mean, the state's rich enough. I mean, I have licenses in several states, and the guys are paid, and they spend a lot of time, but it's a paid job, and it helps, especially with the investigative and enforcement stuff. So what can you say? Is there anything in the future to get you guys paid?
Okay, first off, I don't know that we're in the future for us getting paid. You bring up investigations. We presently, the board is under the umbrella of the Secretary of State's office. So we were an example, and I will throw this out. We have a staff of 5 and an executive director, all who work for the state and are paid by the state. Now have 7 boards that they work under, or that they are our ED is the ED for 6 other boards besides ours. So as engineers, you can do the math at how much time they can spend. Second problem is investigators. The investigators are hired by the Secretary of State's office. They are typically ex-police or something of that magnitude. And there's only a handful for the entire state. So getting someone sometimes takes several months. But more importantly, you don't have a person with a technical background who knows to go out and, we can give them questions, and they don't know when they get the answer to probe further into that question. And then the other one, of course, is that we send all of our cases to Attorney General's office. You notice they're understaffed. Surprising, isn't it? So to answer your question, I don't know. I don't expect to get paid for this. I'm doing this because I enjoy doing it. And I think it's something, and I'll say it politely, at my age, I should be doing. I should be giving back to my industry that has been very good for me for over 50 years. So, that type of thing. But that kind of segues into, there is a possibly will be a bill dropped in January to take the PELS board private, take us out from under the Secretary of State's office, like the lawyers, like the doctors, like the dentist. I think and the accounting board is also moved. Once that occurs, or if that occurs, we think that we can do a much better job because we'll have full-time staff, we'll have full-time investigators, we'll have a full-time lawyer to work only on our material. But we're not paid. We're paid a stipend just to, whatever the federal limit is for miles from my house to Macon and back.
And I'll speak for myself. I hope board members aren't ever paid. I consider it an incredible honor and privilege to serve on the board, and I'm happy to do that without pay. And so I hope board members don't get paid. But I totally agree that having more funding for the board to do things like investigations would be a good thing.
And I'll echo what Bill and Taylor said. There's something about serving the community. That's what we're here for. We're here to serve, and it's a tremendous honor. So, yeah.
Question is, how often do you meet?
I believe we meet 5 times a year. We meet January, we meet March, we meet May, we meet July, then we go to August, then we go to October, and then December. The CE form up here, if anybody wants to see it after the meeting. We have made a change to the form. It used to be we only required 2 years, the 2 years that you're renewing, to have your CEs there. But what we found were they were people who had put the 2 years previous how many hours carryover they had, and we had no way of determining that. So now if you are audited, you will have to submit 4 years worth of CEs or continuing ed credits, or we won't look at it.
Which is what the law requires, that you keep 4 years.
Exactly, and the law requires that anyway. We just didn't require it to be sent to us.
Well, what fields are on that form? What columns?
Well, you have the institution, who gave the program, the title of the program, the location of the program, the date attended. We have something called all other subjects. I'm not sure what we meant there, but the number of hours claimed, and then we have documentation attached. The documentation attached is the most critical part. If you send us in and say, and I've seen this before, somebody will attend, say, the NSPE annual meeting. They'll send me an email with their reservation, their plane reservation and their hotel reservation, and then tell me they spent 24 hours there. Well, the answer is no. You've got to get your CE thing for what you went to at that convention. I had one person send in that they took a college course. It was 3 days a week for so many, it was 3 days a week for 2 hours for so many weeks. They had submitted over 150 continuing education hours. It doesn't work that way. So, you know, we're working to keep it where everybody is on a level playing field.
One of the things I like about the new form is it requires the registrant to certify that they have read and understand the law and that their records comply by the law. And they have to seal it, too.
So if you seal a document that isn't correct, then that is a misdemeanor.
I'm an engineer who has worked in the manufacturing environment exclusively my entire career. I am a registered professional engineer, but in the state of Ohio. I do not have it in the state of Georgia due to the industrial exemption. What is your opinion concerning the industrial exemption?
I'm the old guy, and I came out of industry also. I spent 5.5 years at Southwire in Carrollton, Georgia. The answer is the industrial exemption is there because when you're designing something inside of an industry, you're not affecting the health, welfare of the public. It's only what, you know, you build a machine, you build something, it's only there. Now, why not get your PE? It's a feather in your cap. You know, nobody stops you from having it. So, you know, I tell students all the time, get your PE. If you never stamp a drawing, that's okay. But you can put PE behind your name, which does mean something.
Yeah, I was going to say, prime example of that, I'm an industrial engineer. I got my PE. I probably will never, ever, there'll be a structural engineer, civil engineer, electrical engineer, mechanical engineer who'll be stamping the drawings. I'll never have to do it, but I have the credential. So
I'll do a little sales thing real quick, if I may. Excuse
sure.
me. Just remember this. When you get your PE, you have to realize that you can't buy it, you can't inherit it, and it cannot be given to you. You have to earn it 100%. That should mean something to you, that you did it.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to the panel. Appreciate you taking time from your busy schedules to enlighten us here a little bit. And thank you to the audience for making this a active and participative event. Yes, Roger, you had a question.
Well, just to add on to Bill's last comment, the NSPE tagline nowadays, engineering licensure, rigorous for a reason.
Well, please join me.
Well, thank y'all. We greatly appreciate being able to get in front of engineers who we still serve the public, but we need y'all's input. So thank y'all for allowing us to do this.
I was just going to say thank you again. We serve the public. We serve you all. We appreciate your feedback. You guys help us be better for the community. So please feel free to reach out to us at any time. We'd be glad to hear from you. We appreciate all your comments and feedback.
We have some gifts here as a token of our appreciation. These collectibles.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good.
one of the things I meant to ask.
I mean,
Some of
a
the
lot of people let it
some of the notations out there is what is it?